Okay. So, your first time you were ever on an archaeological dig, was it in Hong Kong?
Yes, it was. It was in the sandbanks of Hong Kong. And almost the very first sort of stroke that I took with my trowel, and I came across a ring. So, absolutely thrilled, I looked at it and picked it up. It was a ring, and it was, I think that the bank must have been some sort of a grave. I don't remember anything very much about it. I just remember the excitement of at my almost first stroke of finding something. So I did what was absolutely forbidden, although I didn't know it at the time, which was to pick up the ring and rush off to the chap who was running it and say, "Gosh, look what I've found." So he took one look and he said, "Yes, well, where the hell did you find it? Now, can you take it right back to exactly where you found it?" Because nobody had explained to me the whole point when you're doing an archaeological dig is if you do find something, even with a hint of something, you immediately get informed opinion to come and look and see whether you should continue with it and how you actually excavate round it and how you reveal it without actually moving it from its setting. And I'd done all of the things that you should never ever do in the very first 10 minutes of being taking part in an archaeological dig.
And was it strange to be doing that in Hong Kong, you know, a place where history, if it had any, was only 100 years old or something because it was a British colony, and the idea that there was any history before that, certainly in the mind of Hong Kongers, probably didn't exist, did it?
Yes, no, it didn't. So that's really what introduced me to prehistory, because that, of course, was what we were digging and what we were discovering when I had been sufficiently sort of trained to actually become a responsible member of the archaeological dig team. And I found that much more interesting than actually digging up history, which you can hear about and read about and things like that, to go back into a past which actually has got no written record and certainly no memory record of it, and then have to create the world from what you have actually found. I love prehistoric archaeology. That's the thing that I'm really fascinated by, and prehistory just generally.
And then you're in Indonesia, and the wife of the ambassador, so with a bit more clout maybe than before, was it you that were behind the investigations at Bengkulu, or were they happening anyway? Or?
Um, no, I didn't use any clout, I don't think, there. It was a friend who I'd met, it's called John, I think. Don't remember his proper name. And there was a British colony in Bengkulu in Indonesia, and I think for historical reasons he was interested in that.
It was Raffles, wasn't it?
It was
Raffles. Was
yes,
it not?
yeah, that's right. Yes,
Ford.
yes, yeah. That's right. Who lived there? That's right. And so we went. So we went there, and we did a dig there, and that was fascinating. He was a proper archaeologist. I mean, he'd been trained, and he lived in Singapore, and I did some digging with him. I think in Peking. I can't remember where I met him. Anyway, he came over, and we went to Bengkulu, which was on the west side of Sumatra, and was a very small British colony founded by Raffles, who'd been kicked out of Java by the Dutch. He'd attempted, in fact, the Brits had attempted to set up a trading post to get the spices from the east, which actually the Dutch felt that was entirely their region. They didn't want any Brits coming in and taking over parts of their market. So we were kicked out of there and decided, well, we'll go somewhere in Indonesia, which was still in the Far East from that point of view, and make our own market. But in fact, Bengkulu was not terribly successful. Raffles started it, but Bengkulu has still got one or two English things. They still call cupboards, and they as an English name. And there's something else, but my memory is going.
And when that failed, Raffles then thought, well, I'll just try somewhere else,
Yes,
and went to
and
Singapore,
went off to Singapore,
which worked a bit better.
which was a much greater and more successful venture.
And
Yes.
then, so Dad retires at 60, and after being a diplomatic wife for 40 years, you decided to actually take archaeology more seriously. Tell us
Yes.
about your degree and what your thinking was then.
Well, it was great because I had a friend at home in the village, the vicar's wife, who was also interested in history, and we found that there was going to be a course, a pretty sort of low-grade course in Tunbridge, and it turned out that the man who ran it, just at a sort of, well, not at a degree level at all at the first stage, was so good at inspiring the people that actually decided to come and do it, that the whole process was increased, and it became not just a basic one, but it became then a sort of what's
Advanced
a
course,
degree below a level below a degree, and eventually became a degree course in archaeology. And so those of us that really were interested pursued it all the way through. It took 6 years for most of them, 7 years for me because I had to take a year off at one stage. And we got our degrees in archaeology from Tunbridge, as it were, from home. And you know, many of us retired from whatever things we've been doing in the rest of our lives. And I'm so grateful that it was there, and it's been an enduring fascination for me ever since.
And how did it feel about being back at university in your 60s?
It was lovely. I enjoyed it very much. I was much better at it. Well, no, let's put it this way. What I got from my essays were much higher marks, let's put it that way, than I did when I was at university in Cambridge just doing history. I think I was much more reflective, or I don't know what, but anyway.
A lot more
I
wisdom.
did.
You brought a lot more wisdom to the
That's
topic.
exactly the word. Wisdom. That's what it was.
And your thesis was on hill forts. What were you trying to argue?
I don't remember what the sort of underlying thing on hill forts was. I am sorry, it's my memory that's going.
Was it to do with whether they were military structures or religious structures or social structures?
Yes, or social. I think it was, yes, the place that the hill forts played in the community. They were called forts because they looked as if they were fortified and had been built up and could be defended and were defensible. Particularly places like Maiden Castle down in Dorset and places like that. And actually, they were special places, certainly, and reserves of food in the shape of very deep pits where grain was stored and things, and defensive walls to an extent, but mainly there was a very deep religious sense about them. They were very special, almost as if they were the heart of the community that lived in the villages around, and they would have withdrawn there if they were attacked. But they were much more than just, a fort. And they were religious, and they were community stores, as well as being defensive places.
And what was the most fun dig that you had, or the most exciting thing you ever uncovered, or the most
apart from the
ring, which was thrilling? But
I'd need to think about that.
You did some Roman ones, or you did
I did do some Roman ones.
You were in fish guns,
Roman
or?
remains never really excited me as much as his prehistory. It's the prehistory that really fascinated me, partly because it hadn't been written about. Prehistory is before things are written down, and so you're free to use your imagination much greater. And actually I got very interested in something which was beginning then, which was called landscape archaeology. Up till the this was the 80s or 90s, 1980s, 90s. Very often archaeology was very site specific, i.e., you know, if you thought there was a village, you would dig and find the houses and things, and then you'd be interested in that. But actually much more important, which people were beginning to understand, and this is where landscape archaeology came in, is why did they put their village there? What was it about what was a much broader spread that actually persuaded people that this was the place to settle? And that I found fascinating because it extended your view. If you stood in a place, you could be standing, you know, in a little village or by a pit or something else, but it's actually what you could see from the place as you looked around. Where was the nearest water? Was it defensible? Why was it there? What was the land like around it? And then I loved the beginning of landscape archaeology and your place in it.
And that was in Bodmin Moor. You went a few times. Is that the best place for landscape?
Landscape archaeology. No, I think I was doing. I went to Bodmin Moor and was into the archaeology at times when, in fact, we were investigating very early little huts, and it was before the sort of wider scope. I always felt that there was something more, but the idea of landscape archaeology hadn't yet arrived and hadn't really sort of arisen. But I just love the moors there anyway. The thing about Cornwall is that everybody thinks of Cornwall as just being coastal, and discovering Bodmin Moor and the life that was lived on it and the houses they lived in and why they lived there, and the extent of the moor was absolutely fascinated me. So Cornwall is very sharply divided in my mind between the wonderful coast, which of course I love because I grew up there, and then the archaeology, prehistoric archaeology of the moor in the very centre of Cornwall, which I find now the most interesting thing about Cornwall. I tried to influence my friends and my family without
But
much
they prefer to go
success.
to the beach.
They prefer the beach, exactly. I'm not surprised.
Let's stop there, and we might now change and go inside,
Right,
just
okay.
briefly.
Am I making any sense?
Yes,
at
yes,
all?
it's lovely. Yeah, yeah,
Are you sure?
yeah.